Welcome into Slick Talk. This is your host, Joe. Blackstone Joe, regular Joe, Joseph, whatever you do, just don't call me Joey, because if you do, I'm not going to answer your email. So anyone who has any ideas, who's trying to get cute, just because I opened you up to my greatest pet peeve, don't do it. Don't do it. We want to keep good relationships here. Especially around the globe, because yes, that's correct. Slick Talk is global, and I want to give a shout out to some of our latest listeners who have joined the Slick Talk army. Russia, Romania, Denmark. Shout out to all of you. We keep an eye on the listener map because it's awesome to know where our listens are coming from. And it's really cool to know that this podcast humbly started in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and is being listened to all over the world. That's awesome. People who are interested in what we're talking about and coming back on a repeat basis, that's really cool. And speaking of people who are listening on a repeat basis, we're just in a really generous mood right now. With giveaways. I can't help myself, mainly just because I want everyone to get their hands on some of our Slick Talk merch, because I love how it turned out. We have our black shirts with the white font and the white Blackstone Laboratories logo on the back. We have our white shirts with our purple font and purple logo on the back. We also have our own hats as well. These things turned out great. They have the Slick Talk logo patched onto the hat. It's just a really neat design that I haven't seen anywhere else. So, giveaway. Yes, another one. Here's something that's kind of just, it's gotten to me. I like even numbers. I like really pleasant even numbers to look at. And on iTunes, we've been sitting on 39 ratings for a while. Let's make that 40. And I'll tell you what, the next person who sends us a screenshot of a iTunes review, a positive one, a new one, 5 stars, throw in a comment there, screenshot it, post it, tag us. Okay, you can tag us on Facebook, you can tag us on Instagram. All you have to do, if you're an iTunes listener, is leave a review, screenshot it, post it, tag us. And the first one that we see, we're going to send you your own hat, your own shirt. And in addition, if you miss out on the giveaway, yes, there will probably be more in the future, but on the flip side, if you would like to just go on and buy a shirt or a hat for yourself, maybe someone you know who likes the show, or someone who just likes good apparel in general, cruise on over to our website, blackstone-labs.com. Under products, you will find Slick Talk swag, and you can order your own shirt and hat there. Okay, so it's time for the main event. Metal and how much is too much. So, people ask us this question all the time, rightfully so. You want the most straightforward answer, the easiest way. People don't like to go to the doctor's office and have to go in circles trying to figure out if they have a particular ailment or not. But just like going to the doctor, often there are multiple explanations for symptoms. And doctors, they have to take everything into account. They have to take your medical history into account. They have to look at, what symptoms might be mirroring other things. It's a game of association and pointing you in the right direction, and then developing an action plan for where to go from there. Oil analysis is not very different from that, because there are multiple explanations for high levels. There are many different problems that can arise, and some of them have the same sort of the same sort of explanation. So just diverging a little bit off metals for a moment, because I think this is a point that illustrates what I'm talking about with, possible explanations for elements that have a chameleon-like nature. Because I think sometimes this can frustrate people, and I've seen some comments on, online forums and whatnot from people who are kind of frustrated that, we can't just always see a high level and be, boom, you have a camshaft that's about to go, or you're about to, have a cylinder fail, or you name it. So this is in reference to coolant contamination, because I remember seeing a comment on a forum where someone said, oh, Blackstone doesn't know how to identify coolant because on one of my reports, I saw a question mark. How can you possibly have a question about whether or not there's coolant? That's ridiculous. And look, I understand, people want to get to the root of the problem as quickly as possible, but here are the facts. These same elements that are contained in glycol-based coolant are also found in other substances. So sodium, the big one, I would say, in terms of where there can be a degree of confusion. It can come from oil additive. A lot of blends use it, just not all of them. And in some instances, we can get a bit more specific, like, diesel engine oils do not use it, but gasoline engine oils do. So we have to take into account the engine, the engine type and the oil type. And as for potassium, the other big coolant marker, it can be found in certain additives like arch oil or Revex. So there are going to be instances where there's just a little bit of ambiguity, and it would be wrong for us to outright call coolant if there are other possibilities. But going back to metals, because metals can also have a chameleon-like nature as far as sources, and let's just jump right to talking about high levels. What do high levels show? So not all high levels mean the same thing. And how do we determine, perhaps maybe putting the cart before the horse here, how do we determine what a high level is? Well, if you're a veteran of used oil analysis, then you're familiar with universal averages. So our averages are going to be specific to the engine type, something I always like to clarify, because a lot of people wonder, okay, the word universal, that seems to imply that you are looking at all engines, and no. We only use ambiguous, general, generic, whatever term you want to use. We only use those kinds of averages when we don't know what you have. So if you send in a sample and we have no idea, you send in a blank slip, but we can kind of tell, okay, this is engine oil. It looks like gasoline engine oil, so we're going to just throw up some averages. Well, this isn't that. So if we know what you have, the universal averages are going to be specific to what you have. So, if you're a Honda CR-V or Accord owner and you have the L15B7 engine, the 1.5 liter, then we're going to use those averages for comparison. So that's a starting point, right? Starting point to until you build trends, we're going to lean on these averages for comparison. And if you're a veteran of used oil analysis, you might also know about highlighting metals when they're twice average. Often we'll put a bolded mark on a metal if it is twice or more the universal average. So that's kind of the point where extra, excess, high wear, whatever you want to call it, that's something that can be put on the table often in instances where you have more than twice average an amount of metal. However, not all twice average levels are highlighted, because as you sample an engine more, we get a feel for what's normal for your specific engine. Not all of them are going to wear exactly like universal averages, and that's okay. Averages are a starting point, so we're going to build from there and see what you have as far as, okay, this engine tends to make a bit more copper than its counterparts, but we're seeing little to no variation. So we're able to lean on this being a normal amount of metal for the engine and the use it sees. Therein, if I'm looking at a sample, I might well take a highlight off of a metal, even though it's still a bit high, because I know because I know that it's normal at that point for the engine. The engine runs well, you have consistency in metals, all good things. So that's a point where I might just not even, I'll take a level that, sure, it appears high, but is it worthy of a highlight? Well, not so much. Now, there are high levels that, though high, there is really no reason to worry. So I want to talk a little bit about wear-in samples. Let's take a specific engine here. 6.6 liter Duramax engines, those, especially those that came out post 2017. So what you'll see a lot of the time in these engines, you'll see some really high levels. Copper will be well over even 300 parts per million, say. And, averages show a much, much lower level is typical. You'll see often a lot of potassium. You'll see a lot of the wear metals as well. And so in this case, though, you can have high levels just screaming across the board. Some really, if you were to only look at these numbers at face value compared to averages, you'd be worried. You'd be wanting to, run to the dealership and say, hey, you sold me a lemon. Probably in much less kind language than that. But it would be wrong to be worried. It would be wrong to call these levels high because we have a few explanations. We have metal from wear-in. We have copper mainly from oxides washing off brass bronze parts. We have silicon from sealers usually. Potassium being harmless flux from the intercooler emission system. You have a lot of reasonable explanations. So metal from wear-in, not concerning. Metal that can prove to be normal as trends build, not concerning, even if you have high levels. What is concerning is when you cannot have a wear-in explanation, when you cannot have a trend showing that a level is normal, and you have a spike or a steady rise. So at this point, if you are, you may be a veteran of sampling and you might know what to expect from the engine. Let's talk about spikes first. So let's say you see a spike. You've had just an immaculate file and you see a spike in lead. Or you see a spike in, copper. It's important to take into account all the additives, all the fuel types you're using before we run to any conclusions. So why did I bring up lead and copper? Well, together, we'll often see this. A slip comes in with a sample, no mention of additives, no mention of recent work, but we'll just see these sky-high copper and lead levels. And naturally, if you were to only look at these levels at face value, you might well be concerned, and rightfully so. But when we see these really high concentrations of copper and lead, that often can just point to recent use of engine restore. It's an additive that many people have become familiar with recently. You'll see it a lot in cars that, have some mileage on them, have some years on them, and people will, use a product like Restore to, hopefully boost that engine's chances of staying on the road for a good while longer. Nothing harmful about Restore, but it is a explanation for very high copper and lead levels when that additive is in use. So the problem, I would say, if one can arise from using something like Restore, is if you're concerned at all about brass bronze wear, how bushings and bearings and the like are doing in your engine, then you might not use Restore, because we can't really speak to brass bronze wear, what metal is coming from brass bronze wear and what metal is coming from the additive. So it's something to keep in mind. If you want to really have a clear depiction of brass bronze wear, I'd just hold off on using Restore. Now, if you're in a situation, no reason for concerns of any kind, then go ahead, go crazy. With additives, we don't really endorse any because, truthfully, the oil has all the additive you need. We've talked about that in other shows, and I might well revisit that for a full talk later. But that's why we don't throw out additives like use this, use that, or we've found this to be the wonder treatment. In truth, we would we would expect there to be, say if there was an additive that just blew the doors off of the competition and every engine that used it did great. Well, all the big minds in the industry, all of the decision makers, all of the people who are running this beautiful thing, that is oil production in the times we're in, they would know. The secret would not stay a secret for very long. So in general, feel free to use additives, but keep in mind with Restore, it can boost those copper and lead levels. So even though they're high, not necessarily a problem. Now, on to fuel, because I think this can trip some people up quite a bit. Say you have a car with some really steady trends, and then you see this generous spike in lead, a really high level in the hundreds or thousands of parts per million. Well, there is a scenario where you have a bearing problem causing a spike in lead, certainly. But if we see everything else is pretty stable or low, normal for what we've been finding from your engine, then we would have to wonder about leaded fuel. Even race fuel that's not marked as leaded tends to have some lead in it. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Anytime there is a possibility that you used non-pump gas, it's at least worth wondering about the possibility of leaded fuel blow by. And we have a pretty good feel for what it looks like. When you have an engine that's doing well and you have this huge spike in lead, generally speaking, that's a classic scenario where blow-by can account for it. But of course, there can be exceptions to the rule where there's a high lead level and nothing else going on and there is a problem. It's just so much more common to, when there is a bearing problem, see metals in addition to lead go up, like copper. If your engine has the tri-metal bearings, you have that lead and the copper and the tin, iron from supporting steel shafts, the whole nine. So a high lead level, not necessarily a problem, especially if everything else is looking good and the engine runs well, you're not having issues with oil pressure, etc. Now, there are situations, though, when you see not necessarily a spike, but a steady rise in metal, and wherein that can show a problem as well. So I want to switch gears to aircraft here for this. So a lot of Continental engines, the bigger Continentals, will be on the lookout for signs of exhaust valve guide wear. It's a problem that I wouldn't say, this isn't meant to drum up concern like every single engine has it, but it's something that you'll tend to see in some of the bigger Continentals. It's a common concern, I would say is fair to call it a common concern amongst owners. And we'll look for exhaust valve guide wear in testing. And it doesn't always, a problem in that area doesn't always register as some sort of sudden spike. But what is a scenario that I would, see more often, at least when there is a problem, are slow incremental increases in metals. In this case, when you're talking exhaust valve guide wear, tend to start off with nickel. Then you might see more chrome, more iron, because all three metals can come from the same area. And again, when we're calling a problem or alerting someone to the possibility of a problem, we're going to have to look at things in context. Do you have nickel or chrome cylinders that might also impact high levels? Have you done any work where wear-in could be in play? We're going to look at everything and not just see high nickel, chrome, iron, and just blast off with, hey, you have a problem. It's important to always, take the all-inclusive analysis before doing that. But it's a good thing to bring up, I believe, that a problem, be it exhaust valve guide issues in a Continental or anything else, it's not always about spikes. It can also register with slow, steady increases. So with that being said, the benefit of building trends couldn't be, more important. When you're trying to spot a problem in the early going before it has a chance to overtake the engine, before it becomes, a matter where there's excess wear throughout the engine. It's best to catch these things in the early going when you can. So while yes, with the amount of samples we look at on a daily basis, we always have instances where someone samples and there is a problem right off the bat. That does happen. And there are also instances where you can see a problem form with slow, steady rises in wear metal. And of course, there are always instances where folks might suspect a problem, might be on the lookout for a problem, but we have some curveballs to account for. Leaded fuel use, additives like Restore, and the like. So when you are looking to identify a problem in used oil analysis, it starts with providing as much information as possible. Taking it back to the example of going to the doctor. If a doctor wants to give you their best evaluation, you have to help them out and you have to let them know what you do on a daily basis. What is your day-to-day? What can you expect? What's your definition of feeling good, etc.? Well, just like that, in engine, we need to know what additives are you using? What's your oil change interval? And best of all, just how is the engine doing on your end? Because a lot of the time, an engine can wear a little differently than average. And a good way to tell if that's normal is, first off, how's that thing run on your end? And then we'll weigh that in conjunction with how metals look on our end. So yes, obvious problems, we see them. Problems that take a while to kind of grow legs and fully present themselves, that too. So yes, we see them all. We see problems that present themselves immediately. We see problems that take a little bit of time to surface fully because they're in the early stages. And then we see high levels that are just completely explained by additives, by what you've been doing to the engine, wear-in exceptions, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, used oil analysis remains the only non-invasive and just plain inexpensive measure you can take to find out how that engine's doing, find out what's typical, and best of all, prevent a problem. So that's it for today, but before I let you go, don't forget the iTunes giveaway. Want to see a 5-star rating, a review? All you need to do is take a screenshot of the review, send it to us, or you can post and tag us. Either one works. Facebook, Instagram. This is for Apple Podcasts. We will do more giveaways specific to more platforms as time goes on. So many more opportunities where this came from. We look forward to hearing back from you. That's all for today, though. This is Blackstone Joe signing off. And my cat is going nuts, being a goon.